Over the weekend, Kenny Atkinson added another piece to his first staff with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He hired Johnnie Bryant away from the Knicks. His exact position still TBD on the Cavs staff, but he worked extremely close with Donovan Mitchell when the two were together in Utah. Now we know, up to this point, Kenny Atkinson's staff looks like this. And Steve, you want to take the one up? He has Johnnie Bryant, Jordan Ott, DeMarre Carroll, and Dan Giroux, who's a holdover from the J.B. Bickerstaff regime here, on his staff. Are you guys a fan of the direction Kenny Atkinson is going in terms of putting different personalities and coaching archetypes together to assemble his version of a super staff here?
99% I am a fan of this staff, how it's been assembled so far. Listen, Mikey, you did a great job laying this out during your Ultimate Cavs show yesterday. Kenny Atkinson overemphasized how important it was to build a staff that created communication between staff and players, that created open dialogue. It's just an open communication type situation. And then when you got a guy like DeMarre Carroll on his staff, who's a former player, just got finished playing, a guy like Johnnie Bryant, who's a lead at player development and has a great relationship with your superstar, Donovan Mitchell, and then you got a guy like Jordan Ott, who's a technician and has spent some time in L.A. with superstars like Anthony Davis and LeBron James, and you yourself, Kenny Atkinson, is known as a grinder. You basically created a buffer between you and the players, and you've done a phenomenal job of hiring great basketball minds and great personalities that I think that's huge when it comes to the chemistry side of things, G.
Let's face it, Mike did a shitty job with his breakdown yesterday. I don't know what Earl's talking about. That breakdown was the worst breakdown I've ever seen in my entire life. By the way, nobody heard of Jordan Ott before 2 days ago.
Well, it's so funny that you went there. When I saw this as a topic last night, here's honest to God what I said. What the hell are we talking about?
This is an underrated part of what they've done because they haven't done anything else this offseason.
No, it's not an underrated part. It's what they've done. And here's my point. We're inside baseball, okay?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we do. Mike is inside basketball.
Big time.
When you start asking me to grade the quality of the assistant coaches on the Cavs coaching staff,
you're in trouble.
I'm hitting my tap out button. I don't know anything about any of these dudes.
Let me give you guys a football comparison and see if this makes more sense to someone who doesn't know a lot of what this is.
I'm just looking, Jay.
And I appreciate, Earl, I appreciate that. Bull, I double appreciate what you said. And Jay, thank you for the transparency, G. I hope this makes sense.
I'm just listening.
Yeah.
G has brought this up many times about the Browns and Kevin Stefanski this offseason, bringing in different offensive minds to help collaborate on a game plan week in and week out.
Yeah.
It's not just his way. He brought in Tommy Reese from the collegiate ranks. He brought in Ken Dorsey, who's more versed in the spread.
Sure.
They added a new running backs coach in Deuce Staley instead of Stump Mitchell. They brought in a new offensive line coach because Bill Callahan left. He welcomed Mike Vrabel into the fray to help give him a little more, okay, you were a head coach against these teams. Let's see what you can add.
It's a nice collection of experts.
Exactly. Kenny Atkinson in Brooklyn, part of his downfall was his relationship with star players. He is a self-admitted grinder, and he says, I want control. I want to get guys to work their hardest day in and day out, and eventually that can rub players the wrong way. And we saw here in Cleveland last year with Donovan Mitchell and J.B. Bickerstaff, that personality type doesn't always mesh with the modern-day superstar. So what he has done here, and I'll be honest, Dan Giroux, not super familiar with. DeMarre Carroll played for Atkinson in Atlanta and in Brooklyn.
Of course.
I was familiar with Jordan Ott. I do know Johnnie Bryant because we talked about him as a potential candidate for the head coaching spot with the Cavs. He was the top assistant for Tom Thibodeau. He wasn't Thibodeau's go-to guy, but he was the associate head coach. He also knows Donovan and has a long and fruitful track record of player development. Kenny Atkinson has put guys around him that relate to the players in a way that he may not be able to himself. And I think when you hired the hiring of Kenny Atkinson, one of his most important aspects was assembling a staff that could relate to the superstars and the top-tier players, not only from a developmental standpoint, but from a open dialogue back and forth standpoint. J.J. Redick's trying to do the same thing in Los Angeles now.
Is that the wave in the NBA? Because it seems like it is.
And we saw, and we talked about it before with JB, like he didn't have an offensive coordinator.
Right.
James Borrego was legitimately the offensive coordinator in New Orleans. Kenny Atkinson was the defensive coordinator in Golden State, because Steve Kerr, part of being a head coach now, is less about the X's and O's and more about the relationship and getting the most from your players. So you have to assemble a staff. If you are not the players guy yourself, you need a staff full of them.
And Mike.
And from all reports, and once again, I've never talked to Jordan Ott. DeMarre Carroll was with LA the last 2 years. He's a former player himself. Jerome's a holdover. Johnnie Bryant, we actually know what he's done and who he's worked with a little more in depth. They all have terrific reputations of being players' guys to help ease that dialogue potential back and forth conflict.
And Ott coached under Atkinson before.
Correct.
As well. So there's connections with all the guys.
Correct.
In all seriousness, I mean, who knows how good it'll all mesh together, but I think it is a sign of growth from Kenny Atkinson that he's hired guys that come from, as you said, different backgrounds and have different connections with the players. And I think he probably learned that being in Golden State. You were with this great coach and this great organization, and you learned, hey, I can't do everything as the head coach. I have to. There's a new way to coach players. Maybe Popovich can still do it that way, but that's going out. So I got to be able to have other guys that connect and have these relationships.
So I think the Cliff Notes version is Atkinson's not a player's coach, but everyone on his staff is, and that should mesh. And it's nice to have a guy who's strong in one area that another guy might not be. I wouldn't say he's not a player's coach. He might not be a superstar's coach.
I was just about to say
that. Rank and file player.
I was just about to say that when he was.
Is he even a rank and file? Because to me, it sounds like. And I don't want to label this guy if this isn't right.
His guys in Brooklyn loved him. It was the superstars that didn't want to practice day in and day out, like he had to get his other guys to do to be competitive.
What coach has a handle on superstars? Like Phil Jackson did, but today...
Steve Kerr, who we just worked with.
No, but Jay, I was just about to make that statement. I was just about to make that statement.
Ty Lue does, yeah.
That's what he said. That was his biggest Achilles heel, and that's what he learned the most from Steve Kerr.
Yeah,
how to manage those relationships with superstar players. And another point that you made, I think that's a huge reason, and Mike, you can attest to this, of why he brought Jordan Ott back to his staff. Jordan Ott was the second in line on that Lakers coaching staff, and he was the guy primarily managing the relationships between Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Yeah. And so when you've learned how to manage relationships with superstars, and then you add coaches that's dealt with the biggest superstar in the NBA, I think it makes a lot of sense. You can clearly tell he's learned a thing or two over his 4 years in Golden State.
Y'all missed that. Y'all missed it. Y'all missed it. This a Donovan Mitchell hire. What you talk about? Like Johnnie Bryant on the squad that's my man. My man is gonna be on this roster. You can take Atkinson, but clearly he's the liaison between me and you. He didn't have this with JB. So when you get Atkinson doing things, he's gonna say, okay, how's Donovan feel about this? How do we funnel? See, this is the LeBron James playbook. When Donovan Mitchell has gotten to the point where he has true power in the organization. He got his guy in here.
That's unquestionable.
Assistant coach. He co-signed Atkinson. He got Atkinson and he said, okay, what do you feel about Jared Allen? Oh, I like Jared Allen. I played him before. You're hired. Look, hey, Jared Allen ain't going nowhere. Donovan Mitchell is telling you right now, this is how we gonna move. I got my guys in here. There's some player coaches. All of those dudes, that move right there just showed me who was in charge and how they was moving.
Let me take you behind the scenes a little bit. 2 days after we hired Atkinson, me, Mike, and Ann is sitting upstairs. We preparing for the show. I turned to Mike and I said, Mike, what's the chances that Johnnie Bryant joins the Cleveland Cavaliers staff?
Really?
He goes, it would be a lateral move. It wouldn't make sense. And it's so funny.
Way, I thought the same thing.
It's so funny that he's here now. I heard yesterday that when the rumbling started about Donovan Mitchell leaving Utah and the projected landing spot was New York, that's why he voted for New York, because of the relationship.
That's not a rumbling, Earl. That's a confirmed, legit fact.
Okay, so boom, it's a confirmed fact. That's why he voted for New York. And so it could be a Donovan Mitchell hire. I just like the fact that when you hire a guy that was a candidate to be your head coach, and the guy that you end up hiring is willing to bring him along on that staff, if it helps the superstar, if it helps everybody on his team, again, elite player developer, right? So I hear what you're saying, but I'm thinking outside of that box.
Well, what I'm saying is this. Hey, Kenny Atkinson, you don't get it done. Guess who right on the bench?
No, I disagree with that.
Guess who the associate head coach?
Well, it is. That's why it's interesting.
That's interesting.
It's almost as if one of the coaches who stuck around and interviewed for the head job and didn't get it stays on that staff. That's rare. They usually say, "Okay, that's my notice that I'm not going to be the head coach here."
It happened before with Ty Lue. Ty Lue was on the bench,
but it's fairly rare that the coach that's coming in decides to keep one of his competitors for the job he just won.
Yeah, that was, to me, you brought him in. I'm like, okay. Now listen, Kevin Stefanski is different. You know why? I got Coach of the Year twice. Shut up. You can't say nothing. Mike, you can't put him on. I got the cachet. We talked about it. Atkinson don't really got the cachet like that. We had y'all question whether it was an upgrade from JB to Atkinson, who got the better hire with JB. Now Atkinson, I love what I said. I wanted him as a coach. I like him, but you must keep an eye on the fact that the guy that interviewed for that same role is now the first.
So if it goes sideways after 40 games, you've got a guy on
you've
staff
got somebody that he loved that just so happens to be.
No,
I guess it depends.
And has a great relationship with the star player.
I guess it depends in the end, and we don't know the answer to this. Was this a hire that was forced on him, or is this a hire he wanted to make? Because that's a big difference.
I would say the former.
Maybe.
To me,
it seems that way, but you never know.
I will say this. In looking at what the Cavs have done or what the Cavs haven't done in this offseason, and that's our next topic. When I look at the staff, to me, the overriding message is front office, when they did their postmortem, and they really dug deep into the autopsy of what happened, I think they are completely aligned that this team underachieved because of the coaching staff.
Yeah, they're blaming
and that the parts are here. We have the main core four, the pieces, the pillars. We're here. We just were driven off a cliff by the coach. And so that's what, now whether or not that's right, we're going to find out because they were the control in the experiment. The roster's going to stay the same. The coaching staff changed.
Yeah, I mean,
so what do you got now?
Assuming there's no significant roster changes, which seems likely, but it's not over yet. Because Jimmy Butler could still get traded, but we'll see.
It feels like it doesn't. I mean, is that where we're going, Mike?
We'll get there once. Can I just give one thing on Johnnie Bryant?
Sure.
We'll move on. So I woke up in New Jersey yesterday, and my dad still reads the New York Post every morning. They had an article on the Cavs hiring Johnnie Bryant because he was the Knicks' top assistant. Two things stood out to me from that article. I'm going to read it quote for quote.
Okay.
Quick. This is from the New York Times.
Who wrote it?
Stefan Bondi. Quote, Bryant's hiring 2022 by the Knicks, according to a source. Oh, I wasn't sure what Steve was taking. Let me start that over. His hiring in 2020 by the Knicks, according to a source, through executive William Wesley, was seen as a way to entice all-star Donovan Mitchell to New York. So once again, that was...
So he was the carrot to attract...
Yes.
Wow.
Now... Later in the article, this is also from the same Stefan Bondi, quote, Thibodeau still has the assistants he hired and feels the most comfortable with, including Darren Erman, Rick Brunson, Daniel Brady, and Andy Greer. So despite the fact that he was technically labeled the associate head coach, I read that as that he wasn't one of Tibbs' inner circle guys. He was brought in. So to make a lateral move, and to Earl, this is when I said that earlier, I didn't have that information. I assumed if you're the associate head coach, you'd be in that quote-unquote inner circle. Mm-hmm. This is a chance for him to be in Kenny Atkinson's inner circle with the guy in Donovan, who he's clearly super tight with. The rest of the article talked about his player development acumen, what he did for Emmanuel Quickley, and Julius Randle, who they talked as complimentary as humanly possible about
his development of those guys.
Yes, so he comes with a lot of a proven track record.
He has no question. He's a future head coach.
He's going to get interviews to be a head coach next year.
Yes, he will.
He will get a head coaching position.
Especially if things go well here.
Yeah, I don't look at it as a threat to Kenny Atkinson. I can't imagine when you're still paying J.B. Bickerstaff, if you hire Kenny, you're not going to give him more than at minimum 2 seasons to see what he can do.
And we have to operate under the assumption that this was a quote unquote Dan Gilbert hire. So why would Dan Gilbert hire a guy and put him in a position to where he can be undercut.
Well, he did it twice already.
I mean, but
That's what Dan does.
He did it with
I'm
David
just
Blatt.
saying,
No, but you're saying why would he do that?
I
He's
guess
done
I'm
it
giving
twice already.
him some grace because he's been through a lot since then. He's probably not the same Dan Gilbert. But to another point, before we move on from this, we seen this with the Browns last offseason when they was searching for different coaches, right? I think Dickerson came in here, was a candidate for OC. He ended up being the offensive line coach. Sometimes when you go through the interview process with some of these coaches, he might not be your top choice for one
That
position.
job, yeah.
But I can still see this guy in this position, etc. And I think for Dan Gilbert to be willing to write the check for top-notch assistants like that, it says that he's all in on this too. One last point on all this. Player development, those two words that we keep using throughout this entire process. It's been associated with Kenny Atkinson. It's been associated with Johnnie Bryant. People need to understand. It starts with guys like Evan Mobley. It trickles all the way down to guys like Imani Bates, right? Sure. We have a lot of young guys on this roster that has raw potential or a high ceiling that they haven't reached yet. And when you can get the majority of your staff bought in on developing talent, it'll make it a very, very interesting season for the Cavaliers coming up.
Yeah.
Monty Bates
It
will
will.
dominate the G League after these hirings.
We will talk about him in the Summer League coming up.
Gonna get